I'm going to continue by introducing our second panelist today with Dr. Zvi Barel, who is the Middle Eastern Affairs Analyst for the Haaretz newspaper, as I'm sure most of you already know. He's a columnist and a member of the editorial board at Haaretz. He has been with the newspaper since 1982 and has written extensively on Arab and Islamic world. In 2009, he was awarded the Sokolov Prize for Lifetime Achievement in Print Journalism. Dr. Barel has a PhD in history of the Middle East, and he also teaches at the Sapir Academic College and at Ben Gurion University. And the topic of his presentation is Arab Spring, Turkish tests, dilemmas in Turkish foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. And thank you, Ephraim, for defining not the axis of evil, but evil in its incarnation by defining Turkey as such. I couldn't have done it better. I couldn't have agreed less than what you have said. But nevertheless,
I like the Turks.
I know. Some of my best friends are Turks, as you may say. In fact, as I was trying to compose some sensible observations about Turkey's dilemmas vis-à-vis the Arab Spring, it has occurred to me that most of us are considering the Arab Spring as an oxymoron to the new reality in the Arab states. Some prefer now to use the term Arab winter or an Islamic winter to the promising spring. And I remember a few years back when Erdogan was in power, but also the army was still in power. I was meeting with some of the, one of the most prominent national security officials in Turkey, and I asked him to define who is Turkey's enemy, who are Turkey's enemy. And he was straightforward, said, well, they are the Kurds, of course, the Islamists, the Iranians, and the Arabs. And then he held back and said, no, the Arabs are no enemies. They are too inferior to be enemies. I'm sure that nowadays we wouldn't have heard such a definition of any Turkish official, high-ranking or low-ranking official, because the reality has changed also for Turkey. And while the implications of the revolutions in some Arab states are still debated, it would be premature to draw sustainable conclusions concerning Turkey's policies. However, these uncertainties pose some theoretical challenges that call for consideration. In his eye-opening article, Professor Ziya Onish of Koç University outlines Turkey's foreign policy towards the Arab Middle East as a clash between ethics and self-interest. He describes how Turkey's policies have evolved during the last 20 months in 4 distinguished phases. These are the first phase, which is the cautious unilateralism that welcomes the spread of Arab revolution and opportunities for political liberalization and reform. The second phase is reluctant participation in a reluctant manner in the NATO intervention in Libya under growing international pressure and the risk of losing the support of Arab reformers. Phase 3 is a unilateral proactivism. The AKP emerges with a great confidence from the general elections, and this is reflected by a renewed wave of proactivism in its foreign policy. The fourth phase is return to a more cautious approach and reluctant multilateralism, return to a more cautious and dealing with the events in a subdued tone. Turkey thus aligned itself with the events as they unfolded. However, it would be too tempting to lock Turkey's policy in a binary cage between ethics and self-interest. I would suggest to combine ethics and self-interest and to consider ethics as a non-binding element in the service of politics and self-interest. These 2 pillars were translated in Turkey into catchy slogans that claim that Turkey is a bridge between West and East and that Turkey aims at zero problems with the neighbors. These metaphors were initially directed towards the West and not to convince the Arab states and publics. They were reflecting Turkey's ambition to solidify its position as an indispensable partner of the West by defining its uniqueness, an Islamic democratic state that can reach and wield influence in places where the West is unwelcome. Turkey was very successful in marketing what became to be known as the Turkish model. However, the marketplace was in the West, who later, when the revolutions in the Arab states have started to erupt, tried to resell it to the Arab revolutionaries. The Turkish model was not created during the Arab Spring, but the Turkish model metaphor overtook other historical idioms during this time. Like the idea of the Turkish model, earlier metaphors reflected Turkey's contemporary international standing and future aspirations, constructing specific self-understanding of Turkish foreign policy. Metaphors could both justify and explain foreign policy strategies. As Yannick argues, metaphors like the Turkish model are conscious policy tools. She argues metaphors are indeed discursive strategies employed by Turkish foreign policy elite to frame and to justify various foreign policy goals. Since metaphors are more powerful signifiers than simple words modifying the discourse, and since these metaphors of vision contain the claim to accomplish several things at a time, their capability to help shape reality is more powerful. Yet, while these two slogans were addressed in details, it is interesting to examine how they have played in the Arab states. According to a nationwide survey conducted by the Pew Research Center in last April, most Egyptians see Saudi Arabia as a better model than Turkey for the role religion should play in government, as they want Islam to play a major role in society and believe the Quran should help shape the country's laws. When asked which country, Saudi Arabia or Turkey, served as a better model for the role of religion in government, 61% said Saudi Arabia. Only 17% chose Turkey, while the remaining 22% responded that neither country was an appropriate model. During his visit in Tunis, while describing Turkey as a democratic, secular state, Erdogan insisted that a Muslim can govern a secular state in a successful way. In Turkey, he said, 99% of the population is Muslim, and it did not pose any problem. You can do the same here. Do not be wary of secularism. I hope there will be a secular state in Egypt, Erdogan said. Few hours before his meeting with the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in September 2011, Erdogan stressed that people have the right to choose whether or not to be religious, adding that he is a Muslim prime minister for a secular state. The response came very quickly. Dr. Mahmoud Rozlan, the spokesman of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, considered Erdogan's comments as interference in Egypt's local affairs. Rozlan was quoted by an Egyptian newspaper as saying that the experiments of other countries should not be cloned. Turkey's conditions imposed on it to deal with the secular concept, he said. Further, the Turkish model was perceived by many in Egypt and Tunisia as a Western conspiracy to impose secularism under a democratic religious guise. Earlier, Egyptian liberals have expressed their suspicions that the Turkish model is just another trick to grant the army full authority to run the country like it did in Turkey before Erdogan's reforms. Indeed, one could argue that the Turkish model has turned to be a negative model of what should not be emulated rather than what should be adopted. The Arab Spring, a movement based upon acceptance of the legitimate demands of the people, cannot embrace the Turkish model without popular support. If many in the Arab Spring countries do not see Turkey as a model, the continued use of Turkish model metaphor rejects the rising popular agency associated with the Arab Spring and exposes the model idiom's selfish use to advance Turkey's role in international politics. Facing the uphill tasks of changing regimes in their own countries, Arab Spring citizens are perhaps little concerned about Turkish politics, inner politics. While the Turkish model's popularity is fading away, Its other foreign policy pillar, zero problems with the neighbors, is perceived now by Arab observers as an empty slogan. Turkey has failed to solve by itself or with others any crisis in the Middle East. The Palestinian Authority blames Erdogan for sticking a wedge between Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas is interested more in tightening its relations with Egypt and Jordan and considers Turkey as a friendly state, however, not one that can help mending Hamas relations with Arab states like Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states. The roller coaster policy that Turkey has conducted towards Syria could perhaps attest to its ethical component of its foreign policy. However, its previous cordial relations with Assad, its lack of determination to use force against Syrian army, its inability to convince Assad to change his violent course, its silence over the Saudi invasion to Bahrain confined Turkey into an observer's post, while Qatar, on the other hand, is becoming the new player, not Turkey. Suffices to see the way that Qatar was handling its visit to Gaza, its donation of money, and the applause it has received from Hamas. Turkey was not mentioned there, and Turkey was not the first leader to come to Gaza. It was Qatar's Amir. Secondly, we have just seen a few days ago how the carpet has been grabbed from underneath Turkey when Qatar was inviting the opposition, the same opposition which was established on Turkish soil, and now Qatar is playing the cards instead of Turkey. Davutoglu was invited just as a guest. So Turkey is still articulating its ethical approach, and it is loud in doing so. However, it fails to convince the Syrian rebels and their supporters that it is able to translate ethical approach into an effective policy or to mobilize through it the Western powers. Hence, even the ethical aspects of its foreign policy are perceived by Arab leaders and observers as self-serving rhetoric, which aims at achieving zero problems with itself rather than with its neighbors. Fans of Huntington's clash of civilization theory were hasty to define Turkey as a core state. The core states of civilization, Huntington wrote, are sources of order within civilization and through negotiations with other core states between civilizations. Turkey is trying to dress up like a core state in the Arab Middle East, but unfortunately it looks like it has no audience to perform to. I would try to aim at some conclusions and say that Turkey, up till now, was not able to influence regimes or policies of states in the area against or towards each other, or against or towards Iran, for example. Turkey was not able and probably will not be able to solve by its own any conflict in the area. It cannot replace forces, political forces, Arab political forces like Saudi Arabia or Egypt, or the combination between these two. It will probably and could stick to its zero problems with the neighbors policy on conditions that this policy will not hamper the ambitions to design its own self in Turkey. Given these conclusions, Turkey will have to decide how to realign itself with the region once the dust settles down. Its major dilemma is how to reconcile between its deep economic relations with Iran and Iraq on the one hand and its ambition to be an influencing power in the Arab sphere. Secondly, should it become a partner in an Egyptian-Saudi axis where it can play only a marginal role, or to promote its interest in states like Tunisia and Libya, attending thus to its economic interests and giving up on its political ambitions? Third, can and should Turkey utilize the Muslim fraternity as leverage to enhance its acceptance as a sister state in the Arab sphere? And fourth, Turkey will need to weigh what implications would any decision have on its internal policies. These are not decisions that can be made by Turkey alone. Albeit it is considered as a friendly country to most Arab states, it is still what we can define as a candidate state, a state that is still suspected of wishing to become a modern sultanate, but one that is important enough to have it on your side. Thank you.